So now we're going to do the operating overview. You've got 9 minutes.
Okay, I will talk fast.
And if you switch your inputs.
Oops, sorry.
So members of council, I just wanted to provide council with Angela some operating budget highlights to kind of whet your palate as we get into the operating budget and what you can expect. I will preface it again and throughout the presentation that this is incredibly preliminary, so I don't want people either getting excited or angry, at what they see. So it is incredibly preliminary. The agenda, item 1, operating budget highlights, some budget drivers, and then just a general Q&A, although I see people already packing up, getting ready to go, so I anticipate item 3 will go quickly. In terms of looking at the distribution of taxes, in terms of what is the regional responsibility versus the town, region, and school boards, you see the composition there. The town accounts for approximately 33.4%, the region 47.3%, and then the remaining split between regional waste charges and the school board. So what's included in the operating budget? The capital tax levy, life cycle costs, reserve and reserve funds, and debt services. Again, just giving you an overview in terms of what are some of the things that you include in an operating budget, and they include really salaries and wages, supplies, fuel, utilities, and other such items. So what are the 2017 budget focus issues here at the town? Ongoing compliance of regulatory and legislative responsibilities. You're going to see us invest, as I said, throughout the capital budget process into beautifications, park, and improvements to public amenities. Again, moving forward with the investments that council's made this year in terms of public realm spaces and future planning around the master plans and the work that need to be done there, as well as some potential staffing improvements that align to some of the service delivery conversations that we've been having. So when we look at 2017 and the operating expenditures, it's broken down here. Wages and employee benefits being the largest at 42.2% and a little over $10.5 million. Operating materials and supplies being the second largest at almost $9 million. And then again, you can see the cut of the rest of the pie on this particular chart. So here is what I think is going to probably generate some conversation. And you see in big, bold letters there how I've said draft preliminary tax levy impact. And we've given you a cumulative impact, but very specifically as it relates to the town, we're currently looking at 6.7%. Now, when I get to the next slide, you'll see what's in there and what's not in there right now. And this is less the growth numbers that we have there, and with the assumption that there's 0% increase in educational taxes. So when we look at the key elements of the 6.7 that's before you, as I said, this is based on assumptions from a waste, region, and school board perspective. The region has set a 1% target. We look at where school boards have been, and we look at what waste has historically been budgeted for. This proposed increase does take into account the recently negotiated collective agreements and the increases in those collective agreements for our unionized staff. Again, this is a preliminary operating budget. Where we're sitting is 6.7%, and that is exclusive of the conversation we will likely be having on FTEs, but inclusive of growth, as I've highlighted. I think I probably am overemphasizing on 4 again, that this does not include potential FTE asks, and that will be on top of this. But I think another piece of that is that it also doesn't include, I think, and the mayor and I had this conversation, any sort of additional revenues. We are looking at the percentage increase on our ICE rates, which would generate more revenues. We are looking at advertising revenues. We're looking at sponsorships. And so as we, I think, get a little bit more surgical with the operating budget, as we take into account what we heard today and some of the other meetings and conversations we're going to have, we will scope much more specifically the 6.7% that's before you. Staff, again, as we're typically doing, and I think the mayor had this question on Wednesday, we're looking at all the asks that are on the table. We have had a very broad brush type conversation around, what are the resourcing issues we have and how do we fund those resources? Do we look at some temporary resourcing versus permanent and full-time equivalents? Is there things that we can defer? Are there things that we can do in subsequent years? Can we find different ways to align some of our resourcing needs and if either put off or be before you with, very extensive business cases as to why we need them. Again, we are trying to align our operating budget, as we did with capital, with the council identified priorities. So this is one of these communication slides that I have before you. So when you look at this year's capital and operating budget, we're looking at approximately $37 million. When we look at the increase that's currently being proposed, it is on the average household of $333,091 per year, $763 per month, less than a coffee a week, or 25 cents per day. So that is the end of the presentation. It's really just meant to be an overview of currently where we're at. Again, we will be finalizing those numbers. We'll be before you on a number of other issues as it relates to operating on a couple of different dates. So we're here to answer any questions you may have on that. And again, very high level.
So just a quick question for you. Since you emphasized about 18 times in the thing, there's no new FTEs in the thing. So you're talking about doing business cases and coming back in and through. What's your expectation on the hit on the operations at this point? Or are you saying this is something that's going to be slotted out through 2017?
Sorry. Through you, Mr. Chairman. The no new FTE comment is as it relates to the projection that we've got here. I think what we want to do is show you currently where we're sitting, knowing that we need to take a list of what could be 10 FTEs, in an ideal utopia, down to something that's a lot more digestible and that, is cognizant of any sort of potential tax increase. And so, conversely to that, look at where our revenue projections are, ensure that they're accurate, ensure that we're looking at where we would increase revenues, both things that are currently in the hopper and things that we expect to be doing in 2017. And so I think what we're going to come back to you with is a scenario. Here's the budget as it stands now from an operating perspective, and here's what the budget looks like should we have various scenarios on 3 FTs, 4 FTs, 5 FTEs, whatever it may look like.
Any questions for Mr. Kirkopoulos? Councillor Njima.
Not a question, but a comment that something else that may affect as we in the next year is our plan to review of facilities and land that may affect not long-term revenue, but cash.
Through Mr. Chairman, absolutely. I mean, I think what we want to do in 2017, and it's definitely on our work plan, is look at all of our assets, look at what can be disposed of, and look at whatever sort of one-time infusion of dollars would be generated from that exercise.
Councillor Bernay, then Mayor Easton.
Chair Foster, through you to the CAO. So you mentioned a couple times over the last few weeks about the ARC process and how, the potential opportunity of doing something with the high school property could be something that we want to look at. Are we missing an opportunity here in 2017 if that opportunity were to come to us?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councillor Brunet. No, we are not, Councillor. I mean, there's a timeline issue that we're likely having to deal with. But in terms of structuring any sort of potential acquisition, purchase, and disposition, I mean, those can be done simultaneously where there necessarily isn't a need to expend any dollars. And so I don't believe this puts us at any risk whatsoever in terms of not budgeting any dollars in 17, either on the capital or operating side.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question about growth. Through you to Mr. Kirkopoulos, could you explain to us how growth is dealt with? Is this a year-end adjustment, or is it a projection that's made for the next year coming up?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'll let Angel speak to it in detail, but MPAC's given us our third quarter statements as it relates specifically to growth, and that's where we get that 1.3% growth that we talked about at the last capital budget and what that means. There's still assumptions based on the conclusion of the last quarter, but Angela can speak to it in more depth.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman. The impact of the growth really comes through when we're calculating out our next year's tax levy, but right now they are estimating a 1.3% growth at our third quarter, as Mr. Kirkopoulos has stated. That's approximately $170,000 in tax levy that equates to right now. So when we do our taxes, we'll actually have the final numbers from growth from 2016 to 2017.
So, Mr. Chairman, through you, I realize that we're not going out looking for work right now in terms of trying to stabilize revenues that would be coming in through growth. But when you look at some of the infill opportunities and the number of subdivisions where there isn't any activity, what is our motivation to try and either increase the interest of those people to get moving on their projects, or to look at a policy that would maybe put some pressure on them to do that?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'll let Ange try to tackle, I think, the more finance piece of it, or Kathleen. I think all we can do from a municipality standpoint is ensure we create the appropriate climate. And I think a lot of the work that we're doing around open for business, a lot of the things that I see that Kathleen and her team are doing, I mean, that's how we, can move these things along. It's hard to know what gets started this year and when it'll be completed in terms of us counting. Can we, absolutely forecast, with what level of specificity? There is a little bit of an art to it in terms of what can be completed, because it really does rely on the developer. But I think what's in the control of the municipality is creating the right climate to ensure that these things move forward, to ensure things are expedited as quickly as possible, and to ensure that they're brought before council, that they're brought before, committee to decide, and then to move forward with.
So, Mr. Chairman, just not to belabor this, but I just want to be absolutely clear that, Mr. Kirkopoulos, as we go forward, if we happen to pick up momentum, which I certainly hope that we do, because those revenues are going to be very important to us, at what point would you see yourself having to come forward for us to examine the use of additional contract help within the planning department in order to respond? We certainly don't want people being turned away.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think, those conversations are going on right now, and we're looking at, those, I think, temporary resourcing spikes that are going to come. We think about Prudhomes, we think about some of the other things that are coming down the pipe. So I would suspect we're going to be before you in 2017, ensuring that you're aware of that information and you're aware of what sort of up-resourcing that is funded through the appropriate reserves and through the appropriate accounts is occurring. And I think the only other comment that I would make in terms of trying to generate, additional tax dollars, our ratio from residential to, what we're looking at in terms of ICI, the institutional, commercial, industrial sector, is about 74 to 26, Ange tells me. I think that's similar with what you're seeing in a lot of municipalities. Any new additional business that we bring to community generates taxes. If we look at some of the industrial growth that we hope to achieve in terms of some of the interest that we're finding, we're talking anywhere from $100,000 to $200,000 in additional taxes. When you take that into account, you're looking at 1% to 2% on the levy that is potentially generated. And similarly, when we look at residential units. Now, the opposite side of that, as we look at residential, is there are costs, there's servicing costs, there's additional costs as it relates to, cleaning snow, the additional of parks in those particular neighborhoods, maintaining those parks, maintaining the road infrastructure, maintaining sidewalks. But our goal is to attract business and to attract industry, and again, to create a climate to do that in order to address that ratio, which, generations, at least a generation ago was probably closer to 50-50. With the with the advancement, I think, of the way growth is happening, you've seen the shift go far more to the residential side.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, my intention in constantly harping on this is really that I want to see, and I think Council wants to see, a refinement of opportunities, and so we'll await any clarification that you'll have in the future.
Just a quick question for you on community improvement programs and the fact that we seem to be doing a variety of things. We seem to be a council that are hugging those with just about every area of town and thinking that it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. What's the real true impact that you see on the revenues coming into the town out of some of these things? Like there's obviously, there is a cost that comes into play with this. So how do you foresee this on when you're talking about future revenue growth and stuff like that?
I will. I'll let Kathleen take a stab of it, but I mean, I think she's thinking about what she wants to say. So, I think you'll see in one of the charts that we provided that we looked at what is the potential output of incentives and funds that we would look at, and what is the potential return on investment. And so, when we put out, what is probably about a quarter of the funds and get back 75% more than we put out, there's obviously a return in that investment. I think CIPs are really intended to ensure that, again, we create that climate for investment. Sometimes they're in areas where we want to see growth. If I think about the agricultural CIP or the industrial CIP that we're looking at for 2017, those are areas where I think we're hearing we've got some industrial properties, we've got some large-scale industrial holdings in this community. We want to see those move forward, either through the creation of a business park or a prestige business park, in terms of having those locations come to market. So they're in certain areas, they definitely spur on additional development, and they're really intended to to provide that extra kickstart or that extra lift. So I'll turn it over to Kathleen if she's got anything to add.
Mr. Chairman, actually the numbers that Michael quoted are pretty close, because when the final staff report for the mixed-use intensification CIP actually did have some numbers that broke down the costs of the incentives versus the amount of tax dollars that would come in, and it was roughly a 65-35 ratio.
Okay. Any other questions for, Dave, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I'm just wondering if the CAO and the Director of Finance can get their crystal ball out and sort of give us an idea. Whoever in the finance area wants to take a crack at it, not right now, but moving forward, I'd like to kind of get a guesstimate as to what the overall dollar values in tax increases are going to be from the new development and the new commercial, and I'd like to see a guesstimate number, and if it based on projection of obviously 1, maybe 2 and 5 year kind of scenario, just to kind of get a sense of where we're going to be. And I know I'm not going to expect to hold your feet to the numbers, but certainly it would give us some idea of where we're headed and where we're going to be requiring from budget, from infrastructure and operating and whatnot.
Through Mr. Chairman, I mean, absolutely. I think it's a good report. I mean, I think a lot of that information is that institutional knowledge a lot of us have individually in our heads, but actually putting pen to paper and I think sharing with council whatever those projections are, both from a revenue standpoint, a growth standpoint, looking at the existing policies in place, and I think between Amanda and Angela, they can and Kathleen, they can do that a lot better than I can.
Okay. Diane, you had your hand.
Thank you. I think I'll save it for an email. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kirkopoulos. Thank you, everybody, for participating in this today. It's been a bit of a long day. It would be nice if we could get some feedback from you guys on staff, if this was worthwhile or not, handling the capital budget this way. You know, it's the first time we've done this, so so we look forward to some feedback through Mike on that. So, thank you very much. Oh yes, Councillor Njima.
I want to say that today, it wouldn't be unusual for us sometimes to go for 4 or 5 hours at night for budget meetings. And today we went for, what did we go for? 5.5 hours?
We started basically at 10, so
10. Oh, right. That's
10.
true. 4.5 hours.
So about the same, 4.5. Yeah.
So I think we're all tired, but I think the difference is that most of us are going to be able to relax when we get home, as opposed to everybody going home and trying to get to. Not you, Rob.
Or some of us are going to sing,
I'm going to sing, but I'm going to relax first.
or some of us are going to plant bulbs. So.
Plant bulbs. Well, we have a choice rather than going home and having to go to sleep and try to get sleep and get up, go to work, and
Yeah.
right.
I am now adjourning the meeting.
Just before leaving,